This is a 1965 G4 M10 Flexitor suspension Gipsy. I plan over the winter to give it a thorough going over from bumper to bumper and make sure all the seals are good. Wheel bearings have a tiny little bit of play in them. I don't know if they've ever been done, probably, but this thing only has just over 6,000 original miles. So here's a look at the undercarriage of the AFS Gipsy. You can see a few wet spots there where the diff seals are leaking. That's the downside of using a splitter fork for removing tie rod ends. I'll be replacing this boot. It's nice if you can use a puller, but it wouldn't fit on that steering arm. You can gently put a clamp on this hose, but not too hard. What I'm doing here is I'm pulling the whole steering knuckle assembly off. To get this apart, you have to take the swivel pins out. So what I could do, I could leave this one piece mounted onto the trailing arm, and I could just split it at the swivel pins, pull this piece off. But you have to undo the slip yoke and then split the drive shaft into two. As far as repacking wheel bearings and just changing a U-joint, it's fairly labor intense, so be prepared for that. So now that yoke just fits through there. Unlike this side, you cannot pull it out. Something cool I noticed, the G4 seems to have added a caster adjustment here. These holes are slotted, and then you can take this bolt out and rotate this, and that would change the angle of the caster angle. So that's a retaining bolt that holds the stub axle into the differential. Kind of a cool design. This is a rubber mallet. Don't use a metal one. There she goes. That was easy. These are aluminum housing, so it's not too heavy. The seal lives right in there, and the Torrington bearing is in there as well. You can see that. Nice thin little plastic gasket on here. I'll probably end up reusing that because it's still really supple. I've made paper gaskets before, but it needs to be really thin. You're almost better if you can't get a gasket like this original thin gasket. You're better off just to use silicone in there, because you don't want to put a thick gasket in there and shim that diff out, because the stub axles need to fit into it dead perfect. And like I said, on this thing, everything's machined to such tight tolerances. There's no room for error there. I replaced these seals here where the stub axles come out of the side of the front diff. I've got the new seals here, and a tip I should show if you're not familiar with installing seals, or this is just an old trick that probably a lot of people know, but inside that inner lip there's a tension spring on there, and a lot of times when you put your driver on there and you're hammering that seal in, this spring will pop off and it falls off inside, and it's impossible to get it back on once that seal's in, so you end up wrecking the seal and then having to put another one in there because you need to have that spring on there. Worst case scenario too is I've seen people hammer a seal in, that spring comes off and they don't notice. Then the spring hangs out in here and gets caught up in the bearing or whatever is inside there and damages the bearing over time, and the seal leaks. So what I do, I take some grease. Like I say, this is probably something a lot of people know, but take some good sticky grease and pack it in around behind that spring. So then when you're hammering it in, that spring won't pop off. I've never had the spring come off anytime I've ever put grease on there. But that's the stub axle seal. Rides on here. Right in there. But it goes together like this. This is the inner seal surface, which is kind of cool because you can replace it if it ever goes bad. The bearing goes on like that. It's a pretty tight fit, so I'm not going to shove it on there. Then your spacers go on. Then the bearings. And the tapered cone. And then the flange, and it's all like that. Again, this isn't on all the way, just showing you what it looks like. Those are the swivel pins. This thing, again, it's only got 6,000 miles on it. Everything is still like new. There's a tiny little bit of wear on that bushing. You can just see where it's been moving. That's that. And then for the stub axles, where they come into the side of the differential, you've got the housing which is mounted to the frame. This fits inside here, and it's riding on a needle bearing which is driven into the housing as well. Very, very finely machined. So that is mounted there. The housing, the bearing is there to support it. And then to keep this stub axle in, this locks on the back of the differential side gear. It locks in behind it, and then it fits into that keyway there. So this can't pull out. And then a nut goes on there. That's your lower bearing, the swivel kingpin bearing. This thing is in super nice shape. You can see there's not even any, there's what, 6 thou of backlash there. The gear oil's taken up some. Should have about 6 to 8 thou of backlash, maybe as high as 12. Front drive shaft. Slip yokes are like brand new. There's no play in them whatsoever. U-joints are still tight. And yeah, I think that's kind of covers everything. You'll notice in this here video, when I washed this, I got solvent all over the brake shoes. But I'm going to replace those. See, just with this just snug, I can feel some preload on those bearings. Once I've torqued this nut and put the split pin in there, it'll be good. So I don't know if I mentioned earlier, the reason I split these two pieces apart, the inner and outer knuckle, I'm going to call them, swivel, this axle will not pull through this hole. Looks like it will, and you'd think it would be made that way, but it's not. So you got to split it apart here with the swivel pins.
This is the kingpin swivel pin bearing.
But that swivel pin just slides right in through the bearing into the bushing. These will all be torqued properly to spec. Again, you can find that spec in the manual, and if you can't find it in the manual, you can look them up online. Just go by the grade and the size of the bolt.
This way.
I'm just going to run these down till I torque them on the vehicle. I always mark the axles so they go back in the same place on the spline. This one I just put 3 dots. 3 dots on this one, and of course the yokes. You want to make sure they're lined up dead straight to each other. These hubs have 2 small holes in them, here and here, and you want to make sure those holes don't get plugged up. Make sure you clean these out and make sure they're open, because that hole goes through the hub and it goes in behind to this little deflector here that covers up the outer wheel bearing seal. And the idea behind it is if water gets into your brakes, you know, you drive through water, gets in behind that little deflector, it's got nowhere to go. So to get it out and away from the wheel bearing seal, they put these holes, and that water will come out of these holes just from centrifugal force, because these holes are drilled just slightly on an angle. So the water will be thrown out while you're driving. And then that tin cover on the back side on the wheel bearing, it's got a little drain in the bottom of it too. So if water gets in there, the water can drain out. So there's no water sitting right at the seal, which is how it, you know, it works its way in there. If the water can stay in there and you're driving, it's got to go somewhere. So that's ready to get thrown back on there. Like I said, I've got some new brake shoes to put on there. And you'll see this just fits through that hole awkwardly. I've had surgery on my shoulders several times, so I can't really lift things up. There we go. Have fun. So working on the back end now, do not have to pull the hub off and pull it apart like you do on the front. That hub can stay in place. Pull the drum off, pull the spindle nut off, stub axle nut. If you hit that with a brass hammer, you can knock that stub axle in and the hub will pop loose. This is looking in the back. It's looking at it on the opposite side. Again, this looks just like the front. Bearing is on there, and it's a 0 tolerance fit. That is on there snug. You should push it on with a press, or if you had a sleeve that you could put over there and tap it on, it should fit snug on that. That should not float around on there. It's really important.